I've lived through so many SEO wars, and there's like great propaganda, as you know, there's a whole
Hmm.
cottage industry around this, and something we try to keep a pulse on in everything we do.
AI is it's hard not to think about AI these days and all the things that AI is going to do. But there are still, before we get into all of that, because we can spend the whole time talking about AI, there are, believe it or not, still some things that AI isn't involved in. There are still some things we can do without AI getting involved. And I know that one of the things that you're really interested in is something that you've been talking about for a long time, is building a better admin or a better editorial experience. And so I'd love to hear about some of the things that you've been talking about and advocating for in that space.
I'm so excited to finally be able to put this towards some of my project too, because we use Drupal. Drupal's been our go-to solution for so many projects, and it has this rich site building experience where you can customize the back end to fit your content workflows, to fit your organization, your needs, to tell your story. But rarely do we put the same thought that we do on the front end discovery and design onto the back end editorial needs. And so I love that my most recent project, we've been able to interview our site authors and editors and understand what are their blockers, how do they interact with the site, what's their relationship to the website, and what are their pain points, and been able to prioritize the authoring experience above all other parts of the site. So if we've ever had a fork in the road of, do we want to use this type of a layout builder or that type of an integration, well, the first lens we look at is the authoring experience. And it's led us down a couple of unique paths. And I think it's helping us create something where it's not just easy to create content, but it's actually fun. Uh, I use a lot of these
Imagine that.
web-based tools, you know, the Wix and the Squarespaces. I don't know if it's good to name them, but I like to try them every year. And they've gotten rid of those barriers to entry, and I want to be in the same space. But it's hard to do that with larger enterprise CMSs that have a
Yeah.
lot of reason for complicated content workflows.
Hmm. What do you think is the big what's the big barrier that holds back something like Drupal in particular, and maybe to a slightly lesser extent something like WordPress, from being super friendly with editors and admins, to be, fun, to make content creation, or dare I say it, like page building. I probably shouldn't say that. That becomes kind of a political issue. But that makes like working on your website fun. What is that? What's like the big barrier that stands in the way?
Sure, these platforms are built on more than a decade's worth of engineering decisions. And so, as someone who's been a site builder and is now an engineer, I can tell you by looking at the site, oh, that's part of an entity queue, and they're using taxonomy as part of a first in, last out queue. Wow, did I just get computer science geeky on that? And I hate when I start working with my content creators and I realize that they're demystifying the Drupal architecture, and they start using words like node and taxonomy and entity relationships and the views and renderer engine. If you have to learn how the system works under the hood, um, I suppose great for you if that helps you feel more empowered. But to me, it's gut wrenching. I feel like I lost. I don't want you to have to look at the site and think, what is this thing working as under the hood? No, it's just content. I want to edit it. How do I edit a menu? How do I edit that thing in the footer? How do I change my display state or my background color? You shouldn't have to learn the inner workings of it. But unfortunately, these are tools built by folks from software engineering more than UX professionals. And so there's a lag of that user feedback of making it kind of friendly and able to just jump right in and feel productive. I really enjoyed the concepts of layout builders and compostable content. And I see a future, and not too distant future, where we can just sort of generate content on the fly and feel happy for it. You know, pick an icon, and all of a sudden it generates something that looks kind of what I was expecting.
So is part of the problem then that so much of the backend interface is built simply to reflect the underlying data model?
those artifacts are always going to be present. And I would even add to it that the interfaces are pretty generic out of the box. When you work with an system of extensions and it's designed for personalization, it's also kind of generic out of the box. And so if you want to be a brand ambassador, we have to be responsible for carrying those front end design practices into our back end and not allowing the default dashboard to be the one that you assume is going to be useful to your content creators.
And so this project that you've been working on recently, and this is one that we actually discussed in the last episode. This is for a large university. It's a web platform that will eventually power thousands of websites. And so there's a very large constituency that needs to be taken into account. What are some of the like interesting takeaways from interviewing and observing the site admins and the editors and the content creators? Like, what were some interesting takeaways or things that maybe you didn't expect going into this project?
One of the biggest give and takes has been around governance and ownership. We want to really trust our content creators to produce the best content. It's certainly part of their job, but when you talk about thousands of sites, there will be many people where they might only contribute to their website one day a month. It's not top of mind. And even if they went through a training, it's not something they do every day, so they're not going to retain that. So the idea of self-service became a guiding principle. How can I get in and feel impactful without needing in another browser tab step-by-step instructions? And the give and take has been, as product owners, do we want to enforce rules for best practice, mind you, enforce rules that only allow certain types of content, or do we want to trust our team? Do we want to relax the constraints and let them put whatever content they may want? And so a good example of that has been using a module that does a character count, because we know that for this particular Spotlight component, right around 400 characters is where the design best shines. And so having a character limit where it starts to drop down and say, 40, 30, 20 characters remaining for best practice, but it doesn't cut them off. The little counter goes red and just gently warns them, you're really pushing the limits of what this component should do. Maybe you should try something else, has been a way to help them in that self-service, help them feel a little more empowered of, oh, I'm using this tool correctly, without forcing them into something where they're counting every individual word and trying to rewrite their language to hit a 400 character limit.
So in other words, it doesn't cut them off. It doesn't stop them, but it does maybe start to count backwards and say, oh, you're sort of 5, 10, 15 characters over the recommended limit, but we're not going to stop you.
That's exactly right. And I've worked on sites that were the opposite as far as governance goes, wanting to really hone in on the best type of a landing page, where we had a component called intro text. And the intro text could appear on a page, and there could only be one of them. And so it was just a larger version of text. It was a larger lead, and stylistically, it was interesting. And so a content creator might want to put one at the top of the page, and then they put one on the bottom of the page because it was a nice outro. But the system would send an error on save. Oh, sorry, you can only have one of these. And then so they would remove the outro, and on save it would say, sorry, this has to be the very first thing on the page. You cannot have a banner image before it. These constraints just left the content creator feeling dejected, and they had to learn the mechanics, which were really artificial business requirements. There was no reason you couldn't use this component on the bottom of the page other than a very well-intentioned content architect decided you could only have one on the page and it had to be at the top. So for this project, we've tried to trust those content creators more for two reasons. One, it's their job. I want to get out of the way. I'm going to trust that they're going to find ways to use these components that I never imagined. And the second is I don't want to scare them away. I want them to embrace the platform because they will always find a workaround anyways, right? There's always going to be a way to abuse these components. So instead of trying to artificially create something foolproof, let's just create a friendly environment where they feel safe to play around.
Interesting. So it is sort of the tendency of systems, of software, of platforms to be limiting or maybe even prescriptive in their approach to say that you must do it this way, or you can have this but no more, or here are your boundaries. But instead, the approach that was taken was, this is our recommendation, but you're allowed to do things outside of this recommendation. And it's maybe that friendliness that actually maybe creates more enforcement in a way, because you're, by allowing people to go outside of the lines, maybe they actually stay inside them in a way. Is that maybe the thinking?
I think that's part of it. The content tools are designed to be flexible. And if we try to limit what they're capable of doing, we're going to limit the stories that can be told. So staying out of the way and then watching how people are using these tools has been great for the iterative process. And we get to see how people are pushing the limits of these tools and then iterating from there, learning from it, prioritizing that iteration process. The other thing that has gone very well is the use of example and sample and templated content. So we're currently adding a feature that when someone wants to add a new page, and this is a Drupal site, they have the choice. Do I want to add a blank page? That's normal, Drupal node add page. Or do I want to add one from a template? And so we're given a prompt of, is it a landing page, a frequently asked question page, a lab page, a program page? And if they create one of these, they're given not lorem ipsum, but directed content, some copy that shows the best use of that component. So almost implicitly, they're getting an idea of what is a good character limit. What are good images to use this space? What are the best colors to use next to each other to get this cool landing page design? And I'm hoping that this satisfies another need where I always feel like a frequently asked questions page is a loss as like a content creator. I feel like I've lost my user if I need that. But if folks are going to create it and they're going to create it, at least we're able to give the best example of a frequently asked question page.
Well, speaking of maybe content that may not exist in the future, like frequently asked questions, things that might replace it. Let's get into AI. When I think about what AI can replace in the future, frequently asked questions is one of those things that almost immediately comes to mind, because an FAQ is exactly the kind of content that, it really does have a place, and it has a place because it's kind of like it's the junk drawer. It's the place where nothing else, it doesn't belong anywhere else, but it has to belong. Like, it has to go somewhere. It's maybe it doesn't go in this section of the site, it doesn't go on that page, or it's really important, but you can't really figure out how to bubble it up anywhere else. It's that place in your house where you got to put that thing, but that thing doesn't belong anywhere else, but you just know it's there, right? And you kind of have an intuition that, like, well, that's probably where I'm going to find it when it comes time to look for it, right? So you wind up you put it in the FAQ. So AI to me is the FAQ page is going to go away because AI in a like kind of chat GPT style interaction, if you're interacting with AI in the format of like a chat bot, and you say, hey, I have a question, what's the answer to my question? There goes the FAQ, right? It's gone because the AI can just answer that random junk drawer question for me. I know that you have some feelings about other things that can go away as AI becomes something that is increasingly integrated with websites and workflows. So I'm curious to hear what are some of those other things that might be a thing of the past in a few years.
I'm so excited for this because if there's two features that I feel like I reinvent the wheel over and over again, it's website navigation and it's site search. And they're necessary, right? We've trained our users to use these tools, although I guess I'm one of those that will end up Googling it just to get to your site. I find the back door to the content. But a lot of folks are still using that menu or they're using the site search. And one of the biggest problems with this is your user has to understand your organization to even get started. They need to get in your head and often even understand the hierarchy of how your organization works on a flowchart to know, am I in the right subsection? Am I in the right microsite? Because I don't know your language. I don't understand the jargon that that I would need to know to even figure out, am I in the right spot of the site? And AI has
And
been
especially
wonderful.
in the world of higher ed,
Sure.
where it has also kind of a self, and I can't tell you, you and I have both experienced this, but back in the day when I was actively working on client projects and in discovery phases and things like that, it also becomes kind of a self-fulfilling kind of thing where departments and offices and programs uh, also need to see themselves reflected on the site somewhere. And a way to do that is to put them in the navigation or to put them just somewhere on the site in the footer or someplace. And so not only does it become this a game of, well, the people who are building the site understand the structure of the organization, and therefore that gets reflected in the site nav. But also there is a feeling of, I want to see myself reflected on the website, and therefore put me in the nav. It kind of gets reinforced in those two directions. And yet, as somebody from outside of the org, you care about neither. you just you just want to get the information that you need, and you want to get out, right?
Even as a site owner, you end up seeing different uses for that content. So a faculty profile is one I've built time and time again, and it becomes valuable for recruitment. And this is often the major goal of a higher ed site, but not always, that you want to feature a prominent researcher or someone that you might get to work with if you join that academic program. And that faculty person might have their profile as part of the lab they represent. But that lab has a different goal. They're trying to generate money and donations, make connections with other corporations. They're trying to promote the events of that lab. And that lab is part of an academic program. And that academic program is looking for prospective students. So even jumping through the levels of that menu hierarchy, you're finding different
Mm-hmm.
audiences with different goals. So any way you can flatten that or get rid of the manual having to click through to find where's that content, where's my spot on this site is a dream. And site search has always fallen a little short because it's keyword search. And with AI now, we're searching by meaning more than we're searching by the actual words used on that page. And we're also
Yeah.
allowing a lot more personalization. So if I can see from maybe a chat history that somebody is a community member, the types of content I'm going to surface when they ask a question might be different from a prospective student or a recruiter.
Yep. I don't know how related this is, and particularly with higher ed, but one of the more interesting, I don't know, realizations or trends or something that I've seen related to AI and search that I've come across recently is, I was talking with somebody who runs a fairly well-known SEO company, and this person has been broadcasting the message for a few years now that they feel that backlinking as a methodology for enhancing your search results is an obsolete practice, which is kind of um, heresy, right? Like that's how the Google algorithm, that was Google's main innovation in the search space, was the idea that if your page is linked to more often and from more highly reputable websites, then your site is considered to be more highly reputable. And it kind of creates this positive feedback loop. But it also works the other way, where if you are not reputable and you are linked to from other not very reputable sources, it creates sort of a downward spiral. But uh, that's how you could develop a higher page rank, and how your results your page could sort of bubble up in results. One of the ways, but that's kind of how they got started. But he's saying that doesn't really matter anymore. That with the proliferation of AI, but in particular this idea of meaning and the association of meaning, and the way that large language models are built, and that the way that terms and word associations work in multi-dimensional vector databases, and how things get associated in those ways, that backlinking is not as relevant and is in fact maybe obsolete. And instead what matters is where your organization name or your relevant search terms are placed in relation to other terms that you want to be associated with, just out in the world. And they don't have to link back to anything at all. So if your company name or your university name or your product name or whatever it is exists somewhere in a press release or a, tweet or wherever out in the world, and it's next to the words that you want to see, like, good or innovative or whatever it is that you're trying to link it to, that matters more than a link back to your product page. And how that then is going to impact search and all of that in the future is just so fascinating. But I can't help but wonder, are we going to see something like, the rise of PR and getting people to mention you and talk about you offsite and not even care about linking back? Who cares about that anymore at this point? So not only maybe are keywords not necessarily relevant in a search context where somebody's trying to find what you want, but even like linking back won't be all that useful in a broader like Google search context, which is pretty wild.
I've lived through so many SEO wars, and there's like great propaganda, as there's a whole cottage industry around this, and something we try to keep a pulse on in everything we do. There's a lot of meta information for everything that we create. And I see it becoming much more valuable. And we're already implementing it in some of the places. Media, for example, it's fairly normal to upload an image. But now we're at a place where we have to wonder, should we do some image recognition? Or if we have some audio files hosted, it's always been a chore to have a transcript of the words spoken, or for a video, a description of what's going on, even outside of the language being used in that video. This is now really useful meta information. And it's one of the neat things about how the vector databases search based on meaning, right? We're taking maybe through some natural language processing, not just the keywords, but what their saliency, what their relevancy is, what they kind of coalesce to as a meaning. And we're putting that in the database. So if we can take that video and generate several different types of metadata, including taxonomy words and other types of tags, that seems valuable. And it's created a shift for me, because as someone who's taken on a lot of big projects that often start with, whoa, you have 15 years worth of content. We need to pare this down. Are you sure you want to migrate all of this to your new site? Does this have any value? I often ask that hypothetically and with every intention of helping the group get rid of things that were becoming a liability, content that was competing with itself. If you had 1,200 extra news stories of past events, did that help? The answer now is maybe. There is something to be said for deep wells of content that you control on either your main brand site or even past event sites, making it relevant for how you describe your business in the future. So I'm hoping to see some good direction as the search engine giants start to use this data, because I don't have a good answer of what we do with all of this metadata I've been collecting.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier when we were preparing for this that one of the things you were looking forward to with AI and large language models was having to the opportunity to cut down on the effort required to govern taxonomies. That with huge backlogs of content, there with these large migration projects that we work on, a lot of effort goes into figuring out the taxonomy, either trying to translate a previous taxonomy to a new and better one, or having to merge them together, or figuring out who's responsible for that, or trying to combine them. But there are all kinds of AI tools out there that let you simplify that or automate that in some way, or are there techniques or anything in particular that you found that work really well? Or do you just kind of like, and I mean this in a good way, like kind of throw up your hands and just let an AI have at it? Like what's the best way to handle taxonomies in an AI and like a generative AI context?
I'm leaning into that latter approach right now. Let's see what AI can do for us. One of the things that has always been a chore is writing recommendation engines. If your goal is to maintain someone's time on your site, they've read through one article and you want to have other recent posts or other posts of interest, writing some sort of formula that in the end is a database query takes some work. And it's usually the business owner deciding, do I prioritize this type of a term relationship, or is newer content better? Is there some content that I always want to push to the top of the list? And we come up with these database queries that may or may not be impactful. And we do some content experiments. Years ago, we worked on a public television station, a website where we were trying to make it the Netflix of PBS, I think was our tagline to it.
That was the directive. Yeah.
And I think it was fantastic, but it was a constant game of taking these thousands of video clips and shows and videos that were clips related to that show. How do we tag them in a way that kept engagement? And what happened all too often was the same content would start to appear in the bottom or the sidebar of every page, because without a careful plan on how to use that taxonomy, you ended up swaying it too far in one direction and you didn't get a lot of diversity. And so if I can instead write a prompt to fetch 20 news articles that are relevant to where this reader is right now in their journey, and to see what AI can come up with, I'm actually of the belief right now that it will do a better job than any query I could program. It's just a starting point. We're getting better and better at the prompt engineering of that and being able to do sort of multimodal, multi-shot requests for content. But it's been liberating to not have to write these database queries that in the end don't have large performance gains.
Right. I hadn't really thought about using an AI prompt in that way, but that makes a lot of sense. Because the way that a lot of these prompts are structured, they intentionally do not give you the same results twice. So you could, in fact, ask the same prompt in a content personalization context and not get the same results twice.
And we still have the
That would
ability
work really well.
Yeah, we still have the ability to change things. You can add more things to the prompt context window and say, well, this time of year, graduation information is more important. We want to lead with that, if it makes sense.
Right.
And you can nudge it in the right direction. But yes, it's kind of liberating letting go and not overthinking the problem. And maybe most importantly, I don't have to have a group of project stakeholders spending weeks thinking about the perfect taxonomy, when really they're not the ones editing the site day to day, and they're often less informed than your authors and contributors. So you always had this issue where the taxonomy took a lot of thought, a lot of bike shedding, unfortunately, put into a vocabulary that may or may not be useful long term.
Yeah. One thing that I want to touch on before we start to wrap up is I've heard you say that a lot of organizations don't use their CMSs as their canonical content engine, and instead they just kind of use it as the place where they publish their content. Like their CMS becomes the last stop on the tour. It's the last step that they take before it goes out in the world, and that seems to you like a missed opportunity. And I'd love to hear more about like, where do you see, like, what is the missed opportunity for you? What could a CMS be if it weren't simply the place where they just drop everything into the fields and hit publish and walk away?
This is a tough one for me because I really love the omni-channel and decoupled architecture. I love microservices. So the idea of having a content repository as an engineering nerd is exciting. I can have all of this data, manicured and looking perfect. And now I can push it out to build custom landing pages for my email campaigns. I can use it to generate microsites on demand. I can have it power digital assistants. I won't name them so no one listening has their assistants go off. But having all of that in one place is exciting for me as an engineer. But realistically, the tools that we use to manage our content change so regularly. And it is like the technology. Thunderdome has been my whole career. So maybe it started out with 37 signals with Basecamp. Everyone was using it. And then we started saying, no, we're going to shift this back to Jira. Or now we're in this other space for content moderation. I want to respect that every industry has their own tools and they want to use the right tool for the job. And especially the cloud-based ones that pop up have a lot of energy and a lot of utility. However, when I spend so much time working with a group and getting to understand their internal workflows, what makes them tick. Oh, you're the graphics person in the creative services group, and you are someone in charge of accessibility. Awesome. You want to audit these. I want to build a custom dashboard for every one of these persons so that when they log in their site, they don't just see a list of recently published content. They can see something that validates what their job is at the organization. And the best way I can do that is to centralize operations where it makes sense. And I recognize that WordPress and maybe a lot of the other simple server platforms is not a great place for collaboration, real-time writing of content. But AI actually is making it a lot better to start early and to generate content. Do your ideation in the CMS and stub out a bunch of articles, being able to pass that on to the other people in your organization. So the tools are ripe to do more of these content workflows in the CMS. And it changes my job now from instead of making lots of websites to just maintaining lots of APIs. And that's actually exciting. It's liberating. Let the content people do what they do best. Yeah. I will make sure that whatever artifacts you generate get assembled in the right order, whether it's a question and answer chat service or a digital assistant, or it's a landing page using a JavaScript framework.
All right, I got my 2 questions for you. The first one is, where do you see the future of content headed from your perspective?
I am enamored with the low code and no code solution. And I can't wait for the day when the app stores of the world maybe relax a little and they allow people to generate apps without writing complicated language. I am so excited for that day. We're so close. And if we can just get Apple on board, I'm not sure they ever will. That is exciting because I grew up in a time where I was making GeoCities websites and I had all of these fun things. I was putting my content out in the world, and somehow it's actually gotten harder now that you need a database and you need all of these things and you have to learn Java and complicated languages to make a simple web app. It shouldn't be that hard. So that is one thing I'm really excited for. And
what would that look like? So you for you then, would the equivalent be the ability to create like specifically a web app, or do you mean like an app on a device? Like what do you mean specifically?
Well, the lines are blurring. So there are some websites that will track what native apps versus web apps can do right now, and they're getting closer and closer. But for a lot of very good reasons, especially thinking about, let's say, Apple's business model, they want to keep websites separate from a native app, and they want to have control of their app store. But there are no code website builders right now, and we could make that a native app and have access to your time, your temperature, your GPS position, and you could probably do some fun, very interactive things without writing code. So I look forward to the day where someone who's comfortable dragging and dropping components around, or maybe drawing something in Figma, can click an export button and have some fairly reliable code. That boilerplate code doesn't excite me. I'm never going to be a gatekeeper that's like, no, you can't create something with a database. I need to do that. I'm fully embracing people being able to own like how they want to represent themselves in the digital spaces.
So it's just straight Canva to app. There you go. Like Canva, but for apps.
I think we can be there. Now, there will always be a need to talk security, to talk performance. And there's going to be levels of this, but it should be approachable. I don't think there's anything stopping us from making this happen.
No, that makes sense. There is a part of me that really does. I still miss the GeoCities and the neighborhoods, and it was easy.
It was just easy to get started. You didn't need to know what a Kubernetes was or talk about microservices.
It does seem like it's gotten harder. You're absolutely right. It does seem, even as a professional who has done this most of my life, it seems like it is harder now than it was then when I was a teenager. All right. Okay. Question 2. What's a piece of content that you've been enjoying lately? It could be a book. It could be a trend. It could be a medium. What's just something that you've come across lately that you particularly enjoyed or thought was interesting?
Oh, and this can be way off topic?
It can be way off topic.
I have been a diehard listener of of the Chompers podcast. That's right. This is a twice a day toothbrushing show for anyone with kids. It is a guided meditation as you brush every part of your teeth while they teach you interesting facts about the world around you. We just finished Gross Out Week and it was delightful.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right, Jim. Thank you so much. It's truly been a pleasure.